In this week's episodes, we're going to be talking about conversations. You see, in order for us to keep in the theme of doing the things that are hard, well, we have to include the way we interact with each other, which can be tough too. And of course, that all stems within us. So let's get to part one of these conversation topics: complaining and gossiping. And what I'm teaching you today actually may surprise you. Let's get started. Hey there, everybody. Welcome to the Strength, Yoga, and Freedom podcast. I am so excited that you're here. If you are new to this podcast, my name is Justin. This is the podcast where we use the philosophy of yoga in a practical and everyday way, one small step at a time, to become happier people and to continue to find purpose. And we're talking a lot about purpose this month when we talk about doing the things that are hard, doing the things that sometimes we don't want to do. And before we get started with these two buzzwords, complaining and gossiping, I just want to remind you that you can follow me on Instagram by going to the show notes. There's a link in there. You can also sign up for our free once a week newsletter. That's also in there. And I have a new announcement. Next Wednesday, June 28th, we will have a 30-minute yoga class premiering on the YouTube channel, the Strength, Yoga, and Freedom YouTube channel. This is entitled Yoga with a Twist. And we're going to twist the body several times to clean, detox, renew, all that good stuff. So check that out if you like to take some free yoga from the comfort of your own home. That'll be on the YouTube channel. So again, back to these two buzzwords: complaining and gossiping. Two things we often view as very negative. Is it possible, though, to find a reason why we should do them, just as much as there are reasons why maybe we should not want to do them? And are there different circumstances where these two modes of communication could or could not be used? We're going to cover this today. Now, I really have to be honest here. When I was coming up with some of the episode topics to round out the end of June, I really felt like conversations were very important. And today we're going to talk about these two things, complaining and gossiping. And then on Thursday, we're going to talk about difficult conversations and maybe when we feel it's appropriate to have those types of difficult conversations or not have difficult conversations, because we do have a choice there. And I also want to talk about relationships for a bit, because there are hard things we have to do in relationships very often. And so some of this material is going to spill over into July, and that's okay, right? Because it's important stuff. So we'll be talking about different relationships, ways to navigate them, and so on as we move into next month. So with that being said, be sure that if you are listening to this on YouTube, that you have press the subscribe button, or if you're listening to this on your podcast, your favorite podcast app or platform, hit that follow button so that you'll know when the new episodes come out. So let's start our conversation today and talk first about tapas. Now, tapas means self-discipline, commitment, or even fire in yoga. And we've been talking about this over the past few episodes if you have been listening. And you see, one of the ways you can begin to turn your life in the direction that you want to turn it in is by accessing tapas, self-discipline and commitment. So many of us have said, I cannot commit to this, or we cannot commit to that, or I'm not able to do this. And I believe that this is a complete lie. We tell ourselves this lie and we tell everybody else this lie mistakenly. And here's why: because we can commit to doing things. You're already doing things that you've committed to, like putting your seatbelt on when you get into the car, getting dressed in the morning so you're walking outside with clothes on. Yeah, you've committed to that. You've committed to locking your door at night. You've committed to scrolling your social media. You've even committed to going to your job, even though you may not like it. See, you already do all of these things. Why? Because they're important to you, for one reason or another. Therefore, you are already experiencing discipline and commitment. You've trained your brain to know, hey, I need my job because I need to make money to support myself, my family, whatever the reason is you're working. Most of us work because we need to pay our bills and support ourselves and eat and all of those things, right? So we commit to it, even though we may not want to do it. So we can do it. Only you, though, know your why as to why you commit to things. But one thing I sure as hell know is that we love, as humans, to commit to the things that we find some type of satisfaction in. Now, that is not always aligned with our purpose, though. You see, if you think about social media, if your purpose on social media is to see what Jane is doing on her vacation so that you can silently judge all of her pictures and then kind of feel better about yourself, then you'll keep looking at social media because inadvertently you're feeling better, quote unquote. Really, you're feeding your ego, but you think you're feeling better about yourself. Now, if you don't care, if you're trying to turn your life around, you don't care about what's going on social media or what you post on social media or what other people post on social media, then you're going to stop looking at it or engaging in it as much as you do because it just simply isn't important to you. And that is the bottom line. We make it so complicated when it comes to commitments, but the bottom line is you're going to commit to something that you find value in. The same works with complaining and gossiping. Now, let's remember as we talk about these things that we're driving in the lane of purpose. We're not driving in the lane where there's lots of exits. So we could just kind of bail out and just swerve off the exit and be done. We're getting serious about the discipline of complaining and gossiping. Now, I want you to notice something. I have not once said yet that we're talking about not complaining or gossiping. Well, I haven't said that we're going to talk about how you should never do those things. So hang tight because I'm going to explain this. Let's begin with complaining. So, why do we complain, first of all? That's the first question we should ask ourselves. Why are we complaining? Psychologists tell us that we complain because it is a form of communication that connects people, and it also allows you to feel validated. Human beings need and use words to feel connected to one another. We need words and we need to use them to really feel like we have a connection to somebody else. Let's use an example. Let's say that the job you work at requires a schedule. Someone does a schedule, okay? Whether that person is a supervisor or a manager or someone who is specifically tasked or assigned as a leader that they are doing a schedule so that they have to staff the business accordingly. Even if schedules are done automatically, this person still has to do something to get the scheduling in place. Now, I have been someone who has had to do schedules in the past, and I have been the one responsible for people showing up where I worked so that they could handle specific parts of the business. And let me tell you that there is one thing that someone who does a schedule is concerned about. There's only one thing, and it is this: getting your business staffed. That's it. Whatever you need to do to get it staffed, you're going to do it. If availability is kind of sparse, you're going to hire more people. You're going to make things work to make sure you're staffed. That's the goal of when you're making a schedule. So now let's say you are a person who's not doing the schedule. You're actually the person who's getting scheduled, all right? And when you go to work, you feel like at times maybe you're overstaffed on certain days or understaffed, or maybe, oh, someone's coming in at this time and at that time and so on and so on. So you decide that this is frustrating for you and you start complaining about it to your coworkers. Then your coworkers jump on the complaining bandwagon and you go around and around and around about how the schedule has been done. And you haven't done the schedule, remember? You're just getting a schedule. Day after day after day, you and your coworkers are always talking about how the schedule is done. Now, I want you to really think about what you accomplish when you do this. What are you accomplishing when you're complaining about a schedule? Are you accomplishing a sense of belonging? Absolutely. Reliability? Yes. Camaraderie? Maybe so. But are you tapping into your fire of purpose? And here's how you can tell if you're doing that by asking yourself these two questions. Number one, is complaining about the schedule going to change the future schedule output? That's number one. And number two, how well do you know the people who you are complaining to or with? I mean, how well do you actually know them? Like, think about knowing them, knowing them. How well do you know them? Like, what is important to them, who they really are, what their values are, what they stand for, their beliefs, whatever. How well do you know them? You see, when you complain about something like this, you are doing one thing only. You are reinforcing your ego and your need for control. You feel smarter than the scheduling manager because you think you have it all figured out and you know what's best. That can feel good, right? It does. It feels good thinking, you know what? I know what's going to happen. The busyness will happen here, or this is going to be a day where there's not going to be busyness, or this is a day where there's no meetings scheduled, but this is a day that there are. And all of a sudden, you're going to know, or think you know, better than the person who's doing the schedule. And this feels good, doesn't it? To feel like you know better than someone else, even though it's actually negative motivation here, it feels really good. There are actually pros to this kind of complaining, which is basically complaining about something you have no control over, but it feels so good to bond with your coworkers based on something negative. Does that make sense? You feel validated. You feel like you have a united front with your coworkers because you got the negative feelings about the schedule all out into the air and that you can feel better than kind of holding it inside, right? So now that you had it all in there and you were annoyed with it, you got it out and now you just feel so much better. And so those are positives. And you actually are aware of the negative feeling about the schedule. And so you're aware of your emotions about things before you start to complain. And that's actually a really good thing, too. But let's go to another example. Let's say that you have told your scheduling manager that you cannot work before 10 o'clock in the morning due to childcare. Let's say you've done that. And then all of a sudden, the person who is doing the schedule schedules you day after day after day at 8 o'clock in the morning. And now you're running into a problem with your kids and you're running into a problem with childcare. And so now you come home after trying to make this work for a little while because you know your work is important and you're like, all right, well, we'll just try to make this work. I've already told him or her scheduling person, but they don't seem to understand. So we're going to try to make this work. You're taking matters into your own hands. And so, but it just keeps continuing. And now you go home and your partner is there. And you start complaining about this to your partner and how upset it's making you because you can't afford a sitter anymore, or you can't afford to have daycare in the morning like that. Or your family member, your mother in law, your brother, your sister, whoever, your older child cannot watch the younger kids or whatever it is. And suddenly you feel like you're getting pushed against the wall. So you start complaining and letting everything out onto your partner. Now, what's the purpose behind this type of complaining? Well, is it to bond with your partner like you were doing when you were complaining with your coworkers about the schedule that was made? Probably not. Your purpose is probably not so that you can bond. It's that you are mindfully aware that what is happening to you with this scheduling is costing you things that you cannot afford to continue to spend. You are now working on problem solving. Now, let's merge these two together. If you complain to your coworkers about how you are being scheduled, so for example, if you are still getting scheduled at 8 o'clock, but you said, I can't work earlier than 10, and you start complaining about it to the coworkers, most likely you're doing that so that you will feel validated, you will feel connected, or maybe you even secretly wish it will get back to that scheduling manager and suddenly they're going to have an epiphany and stop scheduling you that early in the day. But the difference is when you complain to your partner, it's because you are genuinely concerned about your well being and changes need to happen in your life before you dig yourself into a hole. You see, that's the difference between those two forms of complaining. They both are complaining, but you are taking purpose driven action when you're complaining to your partner so that you can work through it rather than just complaining for no reason. It's absolutely critical with complaining to understand before it comes out of your mouth why you're going to engage in any type of complaining. And no, you probably will never be able to control every single time you want to complain or you complain because we are human and we do need to look at the negatives in life as a survival mechanism so you can stay safe. That's why our brains are designed to look for danger. And when you look for danger and you see danger, then you have a choice. How are you going to respond to it? You have the choice to get that under control. So I want you to start thinking about when and where you're complaining and why you're doing it. And by the way, this works for just about anything from complaining about places, processes. So when you're out somewhere and you're complaining to the store clerk or whoever it is about their processes that they're probably not going to change just because it's inconvenient for you, okay? Think about that. You are the one who has the choice. Now, guess what else you can do if things are not to your liking and you want to just complain? Instead of complaining, you can make a damn change. Instead of going to the store that you don't like their processes, go somewhere else. You have the control. You just decide you want to make the excuses why you can continue to go and feed your ego. So that's my whole thing about complaining. I do it all the time. You do it all the time. And so now what we're doing is we're trying to get into this mode of purpose driven things that we say. Let's move on to gossip. Gossiping is exactly the same when it comes to the human connection. You want to feel like you belong. You want to feel heard. You want to feel like you know what's going on with other people, on and on and on. And that comes back to our survival mechanisms, which are driven by, you know it, ego. Now, let me explain what is gossiping and what is not gossiping. Here's what gossiping is. I'm going to give you two things here. Gossiping is when you are talking about someone else and you are either A, talking about what you think that they're doing or thinking or their intentions. You think you know what they're thinking, doing, or what their intentions are, and so you talk about it. And you also reveal personal or sensitive information about someone else to other people. That's gossiping. Here's what gossiping is not. Gossiping is not having a conversation about someone who has already revealed something publicly or has actually performed a behavior in a factual manner. So there's proof that a behavior has been performed. And I'll tell you an example, give you examples. And also, gossiping is not talking about an issue you have with someone that you're trying to work through. And you're talking about that with your therapist or your psychologist, your doctor, or maybe someone in your life who is trustworthy and you honor them because of their trust, like your partner, or maybe your parents or your siblings, whatever it is. When you're talking about someone else because you're trying to work through a problem, that's not gossiping. So let's break these down a little bit. Here's what I said gossiping is. Gossiping is talking about what you think someone else could be thinking or doing or their intentions, or revealing personal or sensitive information about someone else to other people. Now, here's two examples. Number one, you may say something like this. Oh, look at Rosemary. Her hair is so messy. I bet in the morning she doesn't wash her hair and then she just throws some water in it and thinks it's so cute. She has no eye for looking good in public. That's an example. Here's another one. You turn to your coworker and you say, "Oh my God, did you hear about Antoine? He told me last week that he went out with this woman and she was on Tinder the whole time. He said he was so embarrassed. He was humiliated. He tried to get out of it. And now he's going to try a second date with her. And he's all worried she'll do it again. God, it's so weird." Now, I want you to stop and think about what the purpose of those two examples are. Think about it. That's right. It's connection with your ego, a sense of belonging. Rosemary's hair and Antoine's dating life affect your health, your finances, your goals, your dreams. How? How do they affect it? Can you answer that question? I mean, honestly, how does it affect you? Now let's go on to the other two, which is where I said what gossiping is not. It's not where you're having a conversation about someone who has already revealed something publicly or who has performed some type of behavior in a factual way, or it's not when you're talking about someone else that you're trying to work through with someone you trust. So that's the other example. Now let me give you two examples here. If you say to your coworker, yesterday, Phil took that report down the hall, and when he delivered it, Jocelyn wasn't there. So he gave it to Maria. I am unsure if Maria accepts these reports, though, but that's where Phil went. So you're basically saying exactly what Phil did and where he turned the report in. Here's another example. You sit down with your partner and you talk about Sharon, who's your best friend. And she's been constantly canceling plans lately on you over and over and over again. And you're feeling that you are not a priority anymore, or that it's becoming a one-sided friendship. So you sit down with your partner because you don't know what to do. I want you to stop and think about these examples. What is the purpose in these two examples? I bet it is to make sure you know, first of all, where the reports go. So are they supposed to go to Jocelyn? Are they supposed to go to Maria? And I also can bet that this is because you're trying to either fix your relationship with Sharon or make a decision about where the friendship stands with Sharon. So I want to finish up by giving you a couple of nuggets about complaining and gossiping from what I've researched and experienced myself in life and how I have decided to change how I operate with this. The first thing that I want to say about this is if someone is complaining about something they cannot control, and I noticed it over and over and over again. For example, you can use that scheduling example when you don't do the schedule and other people want to complain about it, yet they don't do it either. I don't even acknowledge that. I literally do not have time for bemoaning things I cannot control. I have a hard enough time with that as it is. And maybe you do too, because you have that as a form of anxiety, overthinking too much. So if someone is complaining about something that they cannot control, I literally don't even engage. And the same goes with gossiping. I do not engage with gossip at all anymore if it has nothing to do with my purpose. And so those examples of gossip that I gave you that show no purpose, why would you even engage in any of that? Because here's the other thing, and this is number two. If others are engaging in gossip with you, they're gossiping about you to someone else. And I also want to say this. You can do a challenge for yourself. You can say, I am not going to speak about another person in a negative way unless I have to work through something in a private way, or I'm going to say something positive. I am not going to engage with any conversation about someone who is not present unless it is positive, or unless I have to work through something about the other person. So you can do that. You have the choice to do that. Number three here is not all conversations are meant for everyone's ears. An example is if I'm working through my friendship with Sharon, then I have two options. I can be emotionally charged and start yelling at Sharon for canceling or saying things to Sharon that hurt her feelings or that degrade her, which really isn't my idea of a good friend at all. And I actually have had this happen to me where someone has degraded me or I've degraded them because of emotions. And when you have that back and forth and it goes on repeat, there's something else going on in there in that friendship. And so instead of throwing hissy fits or temper tantrums with the other person, I'm going to have a conversation with someone I trust who has proven their trust so I can get all that off my chest before talking to Sharon. This whole notion of if I say something behind your back, I'm going to say it right to your face. That to me is toxic. And here's why. It's belittling and it's rude. If you have something to say and you want to say it to someone's face, but it is emotionally charged, it's better to say it behind their back to someone who you trust so you can work through your feelings first. Then go treat the other person with the honor and the dignity and be honest with them about it. Be honest. But you don't need to say shitty things behind people's back and say shitty things to people's face. Saying shitty things to people's face is going to get you nowhere. So go and sit down with your therapist, sit down with your partner, and let all your emotion out. The other person doesn't need to know that. In fact, why would you want to know what everyone else is thinking or doing behind your back? You have time for that? Do you really have time for that? I certainly don't. I can't even worry about what I'm thinking half the time, let alone what everybody else is doing. And so you need to remember that when you're feeling those emotions also, this is not about Sharon. This is about you. There is something in Sharon that's triggering you. You need to work through that. You don't need to put that all back on Sharon. And so, one last thing, understand this. Understand this. The more time you spend complaining about things that do not matter or gossiping about other people, the less time that you have to do anything else in your life that could be used for something creative, something fun, and something that's going to help you enjoy your life, because you deserve happiness. Time is ticking, and you are the deciding factor in the happiness in your life. Not Sharon, not your scheduling manager, not these other people that you want to pour all this emotional junk out in the form of complaining or gossiping. And so until we meet on Thursday to talk about difficult conversations, I challenge you to leave conversations where people are complaining about something that doesn't matter and that you can't control. I challenge you to stop talking about other people who are not in the room unless it's positive, or unless you have to have a serious conversation with someone you trust to work through your emotion before you interact with them. I really want you to think about these things. Complaining and gossiping have pros and have cons, and I just described all that to you. So think about them. And until we meet again, find that happiness, find the creativity, find the fun. You deserve it. I'll see you soon. Okay, one last thing. The content in the Strength, Yoga, and Freedom podcast is not intended as a replacement or a substitution for the advice of any medical professional, like a physician, a psychologist, or a qualified therapist, or any other medical professional. It is intended for educational and entertainment purposes only.